The crystal towers of Lumara caught the light of 3 moons, sending rainbow colors across the night sky. Inside the tallest tower, Princess Rose stood alone at her window, her dark veil moving gently in the evening breeze. She reached up with a gloved hand and touched the special fabric that had hidden her face since birth. 20 years of hiding, and still no one had been brave enough to accept her without first demanding to see what lay beneath. The princess turned as her door chimed softly. "Enter," she called, her voice musical even through the veil's filtering. Her closest guard stepped in, his scaled armor reflecting the room's soft light. "Your Highness, the latest suitor has failed the test," the guard said carefully. He didn't need to explain further. Like all the others before him, this one had demanded to see her face before agreeing to the bonding. It was always the same. Rose nodded slowly. She had expected this outcome, but it still hurt. "That makes 57, she said quietly. 57 of the galaxy's finest, and not one could trust enough to bond without seeing. She walked to her desk where a small crystal displayed images of all her failed suitors, princes, diplomats, and leaders from 100 different worlds. The guard shifted uncomfortably. "The High Council is meeting tomorrow. They're worried about the alliances." He paused, then added, "Some say we should change the old laws, allow you to show your face before bonding." "No." Rose's answer came sharp and quick. "They know why we can't. The studies have shown what happens when someone sees a Lumaran's true form without proper preparation. Their minds." She stopped, remembering the accidents from the past, the reason for their strictest law. Outside her window, ships from across the galaxy moved through Lumara's sparkling sky. Each one carried potential suitors, each hoping to win the hand of the mysterious princess. Each would fail, she knew, because none could understand that love meant trusting without seeing. The guard bowed and left, leaving Rose alone with her thoughts. She walked to her private garden, where crystal flowers grew in impossible shades. Their beauty was clear to see, unlike her own hidden form. Sometimes she wondered if she would spend her whole life behind the veil, watching as fear of the unknown kept others away. A small screen on her desk lit up, showing the next day's schedule. More suitors would come. More would fail. But something caught her eye. A note about a human delegation arriving tomorrow. Humans were still new to galactic society, having only achieved faster-than-light travel 30 years ago. They were seen as simple by many, lacking the advanced telepathic abilities of older races, making do with basic technology compared to others. Rose had read about them. Though, they had something different, something that made other species uncomfortable. They could adapt to almost anything, except almost anyone. Their stories were full of characters who loved despite differences, who chose partners based on heart rather than appearance. She touched her veil again, thinking. Tomorrow would bring another parade of suitors who would demand to see her face, who would let fear stop them from reaching out. But maybe, just maybe, these humans would be different. As she prepared for sleep, Rose looked at her reflection in a crystal wall. The veil showed only a shadow of her form, the special fabric hiding the glow that would overwhelm most unprepared minds. She had learned to see beauty and mystery in things hidden from view. Perhaps someone else could learn that too. The 3 moons of Lumara cast their light through her window, making the crystal flowers in her garden dance with colors. Tomorrow would bring new faces, new chances, and for the first time in many failed meetings, Rose felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps someone would finally understand that true bonding meant trusting the unseen, accepting the unknown, and loving what lay beneath the surface. She just had to wait and see. James stood at the spaceport window, watching the crystal city sparkle in the morning light. Earth's diplomatic ships looked plain next to the ornate vessels from other worlds, but he didn't mind. Humans had learned long ago that simple things often worked best. "The High Council will see you now," said his alien guide, a tall being covered in shimmering scales. James nodded and followed, his plain black uniform standing out among the elaborate outfits of other diplomats. He noticed their looks, some curious, others dismissive. Humans were still new here, still proving themselves. The walk to the council chamber took them through gardens where crystal flowers sang soft melodies in the wind. James stopped for a moment, listening. Unlike the other diplomats who rushed past, he took time to appreciate the strange beauty around him. "You enjoy our singing gardens?" a musical voice asked from nearby. James turned to see a figure in dark veils standing in an archway. Even without seeing her face, he could tell this was Princess Rose. Her royal guard stood at a careful distance, and other aliens quickly moved away, their fear obvious. "I do," James replied simply. "They remind me of wind chimes on Earth, but with their own special voice." He didn't bow or use fancy titles like the others did. Instead, he just smiled, speaking naturally as if talking to any other person. The princess tilted her head slightly. "Wind chimes?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Most people only talked to her about politics or power, trying to impress her with their wealth and influence. "Simple tubes of metal or bamboo that make music in the wind," James explained. "My grandmother had them hanging on her porch. Nothing as grand as these gardens, but beautiful in their own way." He pulled out his data pad and showed her a picture of old wind chimes moving in an earth breeze. Rose stepped closer to look, ignoring her guard's nervous shuffling. "You keep pictures of such simple things." Other species usually showed off images of their greatest achievements or most advanced technology. "Sometimes the simple things matter most," James said, "like being able to hear music in the wind or appreciate beauty whatever form it takes." He looked directly at where her eyes would be behind the veil, not showing any discomfort or fear. They talked for a while about Earth's different seasons, about rain and snow, about how humans adapted to live in all kinds of places. James noticed how Rose relaxed as they spoke, her shoulders losing their tense set. She asked questions about human culture, about how they built trust, about why they valued emotional connections over telepathic links. "Your Highness," a guard finally interrupted. "The council is waiting." Rose straightened, her formal manner returning. But before she left, she turned back to James. "Will you be attending the formal presentations tomorrow?" she asked. Every day, suitors from across the galaxy tried to win her hand, each failing when they demanded to see her face. "Actually, I'm here as Earth's new cultural ambassador," James replied. "My job is to help others understand humans and to learn about them in return. Understanding doesn't always need special powers or advanced technology. Sometimes it just needs patience and an open mind." Rose was quiet for a moment. "Then perhaps we will talk again, Ambassador." She moved away, her veils flowing like dark water, leaving James alone in the singing garden. Later, in his simple quarters, James thought about their meeting. Other diplomats had warned him about the princess, how no one had ever seen her true form, how looking upon it could break an unprepared mind. They spoke of her with fear masked as respect. But James had noticed different things, how she laughed at his simple jokes, how she listened with real interest to stories about Earth, how her voice carried warmth despite the veil's filtering. He understood why others feared what they couldn't see, but humans had learned long ago that appearances weren't everything. As Lumira's 3 moons rose outside his window, James made notes about their conversation. Tomorrow would bring more meetings, more chances to build bridges between their worlds. He smiled, remembering how the crystal flowers sang in the wind, and wondered what other beautiful mysteries this world held. The High Council chamber buzzed with worried voices. 12 tall figures sat around a crystal table, their forms casting rainbow shadows on the walls. At the center of their discussion stood a hologram showing breaking alliance treaties. 3 more worlds have threatened to leave the alliance, one council member said, his scaled hands moving nervously. "They say without a royal bonding, they cannot trust our commitment to unity." Through a special dark glass window, Rose watched the meeting, her veiled form hidden from the council's view. She had watched 58 suitors fail now, each one's demand to see her face breaking the ancient laws. Her time was running out. The council chamber doors opened, and James walked in. He wasn't scheduled to be there, but the guards had learned that humans often did unexpected things. The council members turned to look at him, some with surprise, others with annoyance. "Ambassador," the head counselor said, "this is a private meeting." James nodded. "I know, but I have a suggestion about the bonding problem." He stood straight in his simple uniform, calm despite the important alien staring at him. Behind her window, Rose leaned forward to listen. "You seek someone who will accept your princess without seeing her face," James continued. "You've tested princes and diplomats from advanced worlds, all with great power and technology. But maybe that's the problem. Maybe you need someone who understands that trust comes before sight." The council members looked at each other. "Are you suggesting?" One began, but couldn't finish the thought. "I want to try the bonding trials," James said simply. The chamber erupted in voices. Some laughed, others protested. "A human? In the trials? They don't even have telepathy. Their technology is basic. They're too new to space travel." James waited for the noise to die down. "We may be new to your galaxy," he said, "but humans have something that might matter more than technology or telepathy. We understand that love and trust don't need special powers. Sometimes they just need courage and faith." In her hidden alcove, Rose pressed her hand against the dark glass. She remembered their talk in the garden, how James had spoken to her like a person, not a mystery to solve or a prize to win. The head counselor stood. "You understand the risks. The trials can be dangerous. Some suitors have been hurt, their minds damaged by attempting them." "I understand," James replied. "But humans are good at facing the unknown. It's how we reached the stars with simpler ships than yours. It's how we made friends with aliens who looked nothing like us. We learn, we adapt, we trust." The council spoke in low voices among themselves. Finally, the head counselor looked at James again. "The trials begin tomorrow at first moonrise. You have until then to change your mind." James bowed slightly and left the chamber. As he walked through the crystal halls, he heard whispers from other diplomats. They thought he was crazy or stupid or just trying to get attention for Earth. They didn't understand. Back in his room, James looked out at the crystal city. A soft chime at his door surprised him. When he opened it, he found a small crystal flower, like the ones from the singing garden. A note written in simple letters said, "Thank you for understanding what others fear to learn." He placed the flower on his windowsill, where it sang quietly in the evening breeze. Tomorrow would bring challenges that had broken stronger, more advanced beings. But James smiled, remembering his grandmother's words about trust. Sometimes you have to close your eyes to see what's really important. As Lumara's moons rose one by one, James prepared for sleep. In her tower, Rose watched the same moons, hope mixing with worry in her heart. And in the city below, word spread quickly. A human, one of the galaxy's newest species, dared to try what no other had managed. Some laughed, some worried, some wondered. But in the singing gardens, the crystal flowers played a new melody, as if they knew something important was about to change. The first moonrise painted the trial chamber in soft silver light. James stood in the center of a room made entirely of living crystal, its walls shifting and changing like waves in water. Around him, members of the High Council watched from their elevated seats, their expressions a mix of doubt and curiosity. "The trial of mind begins," announced the head counselor. "Many have failed here, their technology and telepathic defenses useless against what comes." The crystal walls began to glow with a strange light. James felt pressure building in his head as alien thoughts tried to force their way in. Images flashed before his eyes. The princess without her veil, promises of power and knowledge if he just demanded to see her face, warnings of danger if he didn't look first. Other suitors had fought this with mental shields and advanced neural implants. James did something simpler. He closed his eyes and thought about his grandmother's garden. He remembered the wind chimes dancing, the flowers swaying, the peace of accepting things as they were. The alien thoughts pushed harder, but they couldn't break his calm focus. "Impossible," whispered one council member as the trial ended. "He has no defenses, no technology to help him." How did he resist? James opened his eyes. "Sometimes the best defense is not fighting at all," he said quietly. "Just accepting that some things don't need to be seen to be understood." The second trial came without warning. The crystal room filled with swirling images of power. James as ruler of worlds, commander of fleets, master of ancient knowledge. All he had to do was prove his worth by unveiling the princess. Other suitors had tried to prove their pure intentions with complex logical arguments and sworn oaths. James simply shook his head. "I'm here because I met someone who laughs at simple jokes, who asks about wind chimes, who cares about understanding others," he said. "Those things matter more than power." The images shattered like breaking glass, leaving the council members murmuring in surprise. Behind her viewing screen, Rose felt tears forming behind her veil. The final trial was the hardest. The chamber went dark, and James found himself surrounded by darkness so complete it felt solid. In this darkness, he heard voices, all the failed suitors, warning him of the risk, telling him no one could truly bond with someone they couldn't see. "How can you trust without seeing?" the voices asked. "How can you know who she really is?" James thought about how humans had first met aliens, how they had learned to trust strange beings who looked nothing like them. He thought about how people fell in love through letters before pictures existed, how parents loved their children before seeing them, how friendship could grow between people who never met face to face. "Trust isn't about seeing," he said to the darkness. "It's about understanding." Every time the princess speaks, every laugh, every question about Earth, those things show who she is better than any face could. The darkness pulled back like a retreating tide. The chamber returned to normal, sunlight streaming through crystal walls. The council members sat in stunned silence. "The trials are complete," the head counselor finally announced. "Never has anyone passed them this way. All others tried to fight, to resist, to prove themselves superior. You simply accepted." James smiled slightly. "That's what humans do best. We accept things as they are, adapt to what we find, trust what we learn through understanding rather than sight." A soft chime filled the chamber. Through her viewing screen, Rose watched as the crystal flowers in the garden below began to sing a melody she had never heard before. A song of hope, of change, of trust freely given. The head counselor stood. "The final choice remains. Knowing you can never see the princess's face until after the bonding, knowing it cannot be undone, do you still wish to proceed?" James looked toward the hidden viewing screen where he somehow knew Rose was watching. "Sometimes," he said, "the most beautiful things are the ones we learn to see with our hearts first." In her alcove, Rose pressed her hand against the screen, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly seen. Word spread through the crystal city like wildfire. A human had passed the trials. In the grand meeting halls of visiting diplomats, angry voices rose above the usual quiet discussions. Outside the palace, ships from powerful worlds landed one after another, their crews carrying urgent messages from their rulers. James walked through the singing gardens, aware of the hostile looks from other aliens. The crystal flowers seemed to sing softer today, as if sensing the tension in the air. Two tall figures stepped into his path. Diplomats from one of the oldest spacefaring races. "You must withdraw," one said, his silver skin reflecting rainbow colors. "Humans are too primitive for this honor. You barely understand space travel. Your cities still used fossil fuels. You have no telepathic abilities." James kept his face calm. "Yet here I am, having passed the same trials that your advanced technology couldn't handle." He stepped around them and continued walking, but their words followed him. "The princess cannot bond with a human. Think of the alliance. Think of the power balance." In her tower, Rose received visitor after visitor. Each tried to convince her that accepting a human would weaken Lumara's position in the galaxy. They showed her charts of Earth's limited technology, Reports about human conflicts, warnings about their unpredictable nature. They're so young in the galaxy, a diplomat from a crystal world said. They don't even have planetary shields. How can one protect you? Rose touched the crystal flower James had talked about in their first meeting. Perhaps protection comes in more forms than shields and weapons, she said softly. The diplomat left in frustration. As the second moon rose, James found a message in his room. The words glowed with a threatening light. Leave now, or we will reveal things about Earth that will make you wish you had. He placed the message on his desk, next to the singing crystal flower Rose had sent him. The flower's song grew stronger, as if defying the threat. In the city below, rumors spread quickly. Some said humans had secret powers they were hiding. Others claimed Earth had tricked its way into the trials. A few whispered that James was part of a plot to weaken Lumara's royal line. The High Council called an emergency meeting. James stood before them again, but this time Rose was there too, her veiled form standing at a careful distance. 7 worlds have threatened to break their alliances, the head counselor said. They say a human bonding will destabilize the power balance. Perhaps it would be better to find another way. James looked at the council members, then at Rose. Earth doesn't have planetary shields, he said. We don't have telepathic powers. Our ships are simpler than yours. But we have something that helped us survive and grow despite being weaker than other species. And what is that? Asked a counselor, doubt clear in his voice. Hope, James replied. Courage. The ability to face the unknown and find beauty in it. The strength to trust when others fear. He turned to Rose. Your people value these things too. That's why your laws say the princess's face must remain unseen until bonding, because true trust means accepting without needing to see. Rose stepped forward, her veil moving gently. The ancient laws exist for a reason, she said, her musical voice carrying through the chamber. They test not just bravery or power, but the ability to trust, to accept, to understand. James has shown these qualities more than any advanced being who came before. The chamber grew quiet. Even those who opposed James couldn't deny the truth in their words. The crystal walls seemed to pulse with soft light, and in the gardens below, the flowers began to sing a melody of strength and hope. The choice remains yours, princess, the head counselor said finally. But remember the consequences. Rose turned to James, seeing how he stood calm despite the pressure and threats. In that moment, she knew, sometimes the strongest bonds came from the most unexpected places. Outside, the 3 moons of Lumara aligned in a rare pattern, their light making the crystal city glow like a beacon of change in the night sky. The bonding chamber glowed with soft blue light as James walked to its center. Ancient crystals lined the walls, each one holding memories of past ceremonies stretching back thousands of years. No human had ever stood here before. Outside, the crystal city buzzed with activity. Ships filled the sky, their crews waiting to see if a human would really dare to go through with the bonding. Many still believed he would back out at the last moment, like all the others before him. The head counselor approached James, holding a crystal that pulsed with gentle light. This is your final chance to withdraw, he said quietly. Once the bonding begins, there is no turning back. If her true form overwhelms you, your mind could break. Even our most advanced races fear this risk. James looked at the crystal in the counselor's hands. It would link his mind with Rose's, binding them together forever before he could see her face. The other suitors had called this madness, bonding without seeing, trusting without proof. On Earth, James said, we have an old story about love. A man fell in love with a woman's voice through a wall, never seeing her face. They talked for months, sharing stories and dreams. When they finally met, she wasn't what he expected. But he loved her more because he had learned to see with his heart first. Rose stood at the chamber's other end, her veiled form barely visible in the dim light. She had not spoken, following the ancient tradition of silence before bonding. but her presence filled the room like a soft song. "Your story is pleasant," the counselor said, "but this is different. The princess's true form, it has driven others mad. They saw colors that shouldn't exist, light that burned their minds, beauty too great for their thoughts to hold." James smiled slightly. "Humans have something special. We don't just adapt to new things, we embrace them. When we first met aliens, many thought we would fear their strange forms. Instead, we saw the beauty in their difference. We learned to love what we didn't understand." The crystal in the counselor's hands began to pulse faster, as if responding to James's words. In their seats around the chamber, other council members watched with a mixture of fear and wonder. "The choice must be made now," the counselor said. "The 3 moons are aligned. It is time." James took a deep breath and looked toward Rose. He couldn't see her face, but he remembered every conversation they had shared. He remembered how she laughed at simple things, how she cared about understanding others, how her kindness showed through even behind the veil. "Humans have a saying," he said clearly, so all could hear. "Love is blind. We don't say this because love can't see, but because true love sees what's most important. The heart, the soul, the true self behind any face." He stepped forward and reached for the crystal. Around him, the aliens held their breath. Some had bet their fortunes that he would run. Others had spread rumors that humans were too weak for this moment. But James thought about all the times in human history when people had chosen to trust without seeing, to believe without proof, to love without conditions. He thought about how humanity had reached the stars, not through perfect technology or special powers, but through courage and hope and the willingness to face the unknown. The crystal felt warm in his hands. "I choose to bond," he said firmly. "Not because I'm braver than others, but because humans understand something that technology can't teach. Sometimes you have to trust your heart more than your eyes." Rose moved forward, her veiled form gliding across the chamber floor. The crystal flowers in the garden below began to sing a melody that no one had heard before, a song of 2 different worlds choosing to trust, to understand, to become one. As the bonding crystal began to glow brighter, James smiled. Whatever lay behind the veil, he knew he had made the right choice. Because sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you close your eyes and open your heart. The bonding crystal pulsed between them, its light growing stronger with each heartbeat. The air in the chamber felt electric, filled with a power older than any civilization present. James held one end of the crystal while Rose's veiled form held the other. "Let the ancient bonds form," the head counselor said, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Let 2 become one in trust and understanding." Light flowed from the crystal, wrapping around James and Rose like ribbons of pure energy. The assembled aliens watched in tense silence, many covering their eyes, as the glow grew brighter. They had seen others fail at this moment, their minds breaking when they felt the first touch of Illumaran's true nature. But James stayed calm. As the light connected them, he felt Rose's presence in his mind. Not invasive or overwhelming, but gentle, like sunlight through leaves. He sensed her worry, her hope, her years of loneliness behind the veil. Without words, he shared his own feelings. Acceptance, trust, and the simple joy of finding someone who understood what mattered most. The crystal's light peaked, filling the chamber with colors that had no names. Other species would have tried to analyze these colors, to understand them with science and logic. James simply let them flow through him, accepting their beauty without trying to control or contain it. Then came the moment everyone had feared. The bonding complete, Rose slowly raised her hands to her veil. The aliens in the chamber turned away or activated protective shields. Even the council members stepped back, their ancient powers ready to contain any disaster. But James kept his eyes open as Rose lifted the veil. For the first time in history, the Illumaran princess revealed herself to her bonded one. What the others saw as overwhelming, impossible beauty, James saw with human eyes and an open heart. Rose's true form was living light and crystal, her body a symphony of colors that shifted and flowed like the aurora borealis on Earth. Her face held patterns of light that told stories of stars being born and galaxies dancing. Where others saw chaos that could break minds, James saw beauty that could fill hearts. "You're not afraid," Rose said, her voice now pure music without the veils filtering. "You're not overwhelmed." James smiled, reaching out to touch her crystalline hand that sparkled with starlight. "Humans have always found beauty in things others fear," he said softly. "The first time we saw the northern lights on Earth, we didn't run or try to explain them. We danced under them. When we first saw the deep ocean glowing with strange life, we didn't hide. We dove deeper to see more." The assembled aliens watched in amazement as James and Rose stood together, human and living light, their bond growing stronger with each moment. The crystal flowers in the garden below burst into a chorus of song, their music celebrating something new in the galaxy. "How is this possible?" One council member whispered. "Our most advanced species cannot look upon her true form without their minds fracturing." The head counselor watched James and Rose with growing understanding. "Perhaps," he said, "we have all been too focused on advancement of technology and power. We forgot that some species grow in different ways, not through better machines or stronger telepathy, but through better hearts and stronger spirits." James and Rose walked together through the chamber, their bonded presence causing the ancient crystals in the walls to sing with new songs. Where their kinds touched, human flesh and living light, new patterns of beauty formed, neither purely human or purely Lumaran, but something wonderfully new. Outside, the news spread quickly through the galaxy. A human had done what no other species could, not through power or technology or special abilities, but through the simple human gift of accepting beauty in all its forms, of trusting without needing to control, of loving without needing to understand. In the days that followed, ships from across the galaxy brought not threats but gifts, not warnings but welcomes, because humanity had shown them something they had forgotten, that sometimes the greatest power comes not from advancing beyond emotions, but from embracing them fully. And in the singing gardens, the crystal flowers bloomed with new colors, their songs now carrying tales of a love that bridged not just worlds, but ways of seeing, proving that sometimes the simplest hearts can hold the greatest wonders.